Hey, welcome to the live stream. Welcome to the video. I've got a live stream right here and I'm recording a video. I'm going to also do the radio here 1 second. I'm going to record. Welcome to Jesus is Physics recording. Welcome to Stephen Leake Radio. This program is called Jesus is Physics. We're going to do a broadcast of Jesus is Physics according to my new discoveries. So I get back to our, there we go. Alright, I've got a big thick script for this show. It's going to start the informational curvature of the cross. Act 1, Ontology. Invariants meet before meaning. I'm Stephen Leake. Good evening. Tonight is not a theological lecture. It's not a sermon. It's not an attempt to smuggle metaphysics into physics through metaphor. This is structural inquiry, a geometric one. A question about invariance. Because if physics teaches us anything at all, it is this. We do not begin with meaning. We begin with invariance. Every successful physical theory in history started there. Galilean relativity, Lorentz symmetry, gauge invariance, general covariance. Before interpretation, before story, before narrative, there are transformations under which something does not change. That something is what we call physical law. So let's begin where any serious framework must begin. Let's define the ontological starting point. We assume a differentiable manifold. Call it mathcal M. It has a metric G mu dash n nu. We define a state field psi, mapping from manifold to Hilbert space. Psi mathcal M, right arrow mathcal H. This is not mystical. It's standard structure. General relativity plus quantum state structure. Now here's the shift. The question is not merely how psi evolves. The question is, what does reality minimize? In classical mechanics, we minimize action. In general relativity, we externalize the Einstein-Hilbert action. In quantum field theory, we vary the path integral. In Leakean physics, we introduce something deeper, informational curvature. We define a coherence current. C to the mu slash psi to the dagger partial to the mu slash psi. This measures directional stability of the state field, how identity flows. Then we define contradiction density. I've just got math here. It's latex, written in latex. The internal deviation, self-conflict within the field configuration. Then the informational curvature scalar. I've got then the latex written out here. We pause here because this is the structural pivot of tonight's entire argument. The first term is divergence of coherence. The second term, penalty for contradiction. Reality under the Leakean unified principle minimizes informational curvature subject to invariant preserving transformations. That is the claim. Now here's a provocative move. If this is true, then moral instability is not metaphorical, it is geometric. Contradiction density is not poetry, it is curvature contribution. Let me make this precise. When coherence diverges, when identity fragments, when internal contradiction increases, the informational curvature scalar rises, and rising curvature requires compensation. Physics never allows instability to float indefinitely. Instability either collapses into new structure or it decays. Now, before we even approach the cross, we must establish something. Physics is not morally neutral. It is structurally asymmetric. Symmetry breaking is how structure appears. If symmetry were perfect, nothing would exist. No particles, no mass, no direction of time. The Higgs mechanism is symmetry breaking. The weak interaction violates parity. Time itself has an arrow because entropy increases. Structure is born from asymmetry, but asymmetry introduces tension. Tension introduces curvature, and curvature demands resolution. This is not philosophy, this is Lagrangian logic. Now let's speak clearly. The cross is not introduced tonight as a religious symbol. It is introduced as a geometric configuration. two axes, one vertical, one horizontal, intersecting. Time and transcendence. But do not romanticize that. Let's formalize it. It's a four-dimensional manifold. We can define orthogonal base vectors. Call one axis temporal, call one axis invariant, preserving transformation space. If coherence must be redistributed, it must move along allowable invariant directions. The cross configuration is the minimal orthogonal intersection. It represents maximum directional redistribution under minimal degrees of freedom. That is geometry, not sentiment. Now let's go deeper. Consider the coherence flow equation. I've got it written out in latex here. If stable identity requires, I've got a new latex, then any system accumulating contradiction density must discharge it through coherence flow. Otherwise, it would destabilize, tear itself apart. Now imagine a global field configuration with rising, I've got a latex written up there, internal contradiction increasing, divergence building, and then under my Leakean action, it's a latex. If beta dash negative O, NEQ U0, informational curvature contributes directly to space-time dynamics. That means that contradiction density influences geometry. Let that settle. Contradiction shapes curvature. Now here's the critical step. When curvature exceeds stability thresholds, systems undergo phase transition. We define contradiction potential. It's written out in latex here. Phase transition is another latex. So instability peaks, curvature spikes, geometry reconfigures. Now ask, what geometric configuration could globally redistribute contradiction with minimal additional divergence? A purely horizontal redistribution fails. It remains within temporal manifold. A purely vertical abstraction fails. It removes coherence without rebalancing flow. But orthogonal intersection allows redistribution across independent invariant axes simultaneously. The cross-shaped operator is a minimal orthogonal coherence redistribution structure. Now pause. Do not leap to meaning. Stay inside geometry. In high curvature regimes, systems favor configurations that minimize global penalty functional. I get it written out in latex. Branch weight in latex. A low penalty branches persist. High penalty branches decay. So the question becomes, is the cross-shaped configuration a low solution under high contradiction density conditions? We are not asserting, we are testing structural plausibility. Now let's examine symmetry. The cross is invariant under 100-degree rotation. It is minimal in rotational complexity. It is maximally directional. It partitions space into quadrants. It introduces boundary conditions at intersection. Boundary conditions where physics become real. Every differential equation requires them. Without boundary constraints, field equations are incomplete. Consider this. If a system experiences maximal contradiction density, it requires a boundary insertion event to stabilize. That boundary must intersect both temporal evolution and invariant subspace. Otherwise, instability continues. So here's the structural hypothesis of Act 1. The cross configuration represents a candidate boundary intersection in geometry capable of reducing informational curvature under extreme contradiction density. Not symbol, operator. Not poetry, but configuration. We've not proven this. We've established structural plausibility. So let's tighten the screws. Why does reality prefer minimization of informational curvature? Because divergence is unstable. Because contradiction density increases effective energy cost. Because renormalization flow penalizes unresolved curvature. Running coupling, I've got a latex right now. If curvature grows with scale, you hit anomaly. Anomalies force reconfiguration. Physics hates anomalies. They demand new structure. So when informational curvature becomes non-renormalizable, the system must reorganize globally. That reorganization must preserve invariance. It must reduce contradiction density. It must stabilize coherence flow. That is your selection criteria. Now ask yourself, across cultures, across epochs, across independent civilizations, why does the cross configuration recur? It appears before Christianity in geometry, in cosmology diagrams, in navigational systems, and coordinate grids. Why? Because it is the simplest orthogonal invariant partition. It is not sacred because of story. It is structurally stable because of geometry. If geometry underlies action, and action underlies evolution, and recurrence is not coincidence, it's minimization. Now I'll say something precise. If Leakean physics is correct, then reality minimizes informational curvature subject to coherence constraints. If that is true, then any configuration that globally reduces contradiction density while preserving invariance will be dynamically favored. The cross may be such a configuration, not because of theology, but because of geometry. We end Act 1 here with a hypothesis that under high curvature informational regimes, an orthogonal boundary insertion structure is a candidate coherence restoring operator. Next, we test this against entropy, against general relativity and quantum field theory limits, against informational persistence, against measurement. But first, sit with structure. Invariance before meaning, geometry before interpretation, curvature before narrative. We proceed next into entropy versus informational curvature. Act 2 will sharpen everything. We'll proceed carefully. Okay. Just hang with me here. I'll tie together when we get further. In the informational curvature of the cross, Act 2, entropy versus informational curvature. We ended Act 1 with the structural hypothesis that reality minimizes informational curvature, that contradict density contributes to curvature, that orthogonal boundary insertion may reduce global penalty. Now we must test this against the most stubborn principle in physics, entropy, the second law. Because if informational curvature is subordinate to entropy, then our framework collapses. So let's be precise. Entropy increases in closed systems, always. Local order can emerge, but only at global cost. Stars burn hydrogen. Living systems export disorder. The arrow of time exists because microstates proliferate. Now here's a subtle point. Entropy measures space-based volume. It does not measure coherence. It does not measure contradiction density. It does not measure informational curvature. Those are different objects. Under Leakean structure, general relativity and quantum field theory emerge when, I've got a latex there, informational curvature becomes invisible. Standard physics is a limiting projection. Entropy dominates. But when /beta /NEQ0, informational curvature contributes dynamically, meaning coherence, divergence, and contradiction density affect evolution. Entropy increases, yes, but informational curvature may decrease. This is a structural wedge. Life is the empirical clue. Biological systems locally decrease entropy. They do so by exporting it. But what are they preserving? Coherence density. Identity, stable configuration. Under the coherence flow equation, /frac partial K partial T plus NABLA /C dot J underscore K. Sigma K, stable identity requires, I've got more latex written out, basically says a living organism is a bounded coherence manifold. It maintains integral coherence against entropic dispersion. Now we introduce our next element, the soul, but not as vapor, not as superstition, as a topological structure. Consider a torus, a toroidal field configuration, a closed loop, basically a pretzel in 3D. Self-referential flow. If coherence currents loop back upon itself, diversion vanishes internally. A toroidal knot minimizes internal divergence while maintaining non-trivial topology. Now if we refine this, a toroidal knot configuration in informational field space, coupled locally to a biological structure, could represent a stable coherence attractor. The human organism would then act as a boundary condition, not generator, coupler. The body maintains metabolic stability. The toroidal knot maintains informational coherence. Their interface is local boundary matching, where biological electrochemical fields intersect state field psi. This is not mystical, it's coupling theory. Two systems sharing boundary constraints. Now let's push this further. If the soul is modeled as a toroidal informational knot, then its stability depends on minimizing informational curvature. High contradiction density destabilizes it. Coherence flow must remain closed. If coherence leaks, the torus unravels. So identity is not static substance. It's sustained topology. Now here comes the deeper step. What determines the geodesic path of such a toroidal knot through state space? We define the geodesics in manifold with latex by extremizing action. under the Leakean action, and I've got it written out in a math, basically equation. The toroidal knot, the soul, evolves along paths minimizing this action. Thus, the soul, defined as toroidal coherent structure, travels geodesics in informational curvature manifold, not random drift, not chaotic wandering. Solution path. Now the most controversial step, the meta-observer. In my physics, Leakean physics, measurement is deterministic macro contextuality, where outcome is equal to f psi theta c. Randomness emerges from incomplete specification. Now ask, what if there exists a boundary condition external to space-time manifold, not inside? And then latex, I've written out, not subject to my second latex. A meta-observer, God, invariant with respect to all admissible transformations. This would not be a being inside space-time. It would be a constraint outside the manifold. A scalar wave interaction at boundary of the full action functional, formal terms. Variation of this latex may include boundary term contributions. Normally we discard them, but if boundary conditions are non-trivial, they define allowed solutions. So imagine a scalar excitation imposed from outside, not violating Lorentz invariance inside, but selecting allowed global solutions. The scalar interaction brings to life, quote-unquote, toroidal coherent structures by stabilizing their initial conditions. This is not supernatural intervention. It is boundary constraint at manifold edge. If the manifold is embedded in higher order informational space, the meta-observer corresponds to invariant selection principle across branches. Recall branch weight. I've got some math written out. The meta-observer is not collapsing wave functions. It's defining the weighting measure itself outside space-time, inside the full solution space. Now bring this back to entropy. A toroidal knot soul, coherent structure soul in a human body, maintains low informational curvature locally, despite entropic increase globally. When biological system fails, coupling boundary collapses. But if a toroidal structure is globally stable under branch weighting, it persists along the geodesic continuation, not as a ghost, as a topological solution, surviving boundary condition change. This reframes death, not annihilation, boundary decoupling. The geodesic path continues in the informational manifold. If penalty function remains low, if contradiction density manageable, if coherence conserved. Now return to the cross. Under extreme contradiction density, global curvature spikes. A toroidal knot under such conditions requires redistribution axis. An orthogonal boundary insertion event may stabilize global informational manifold, lowering total curvature, reducing penalty across branches. If such an event occurred, it would alter global geodesic landscape, reweight branches, stabilize coherence for toroidal identities coupled to biology, not magic, but topology under curvature minimization. Now breathe. We have introduced the soul as a toroidal knot informational structure, biological coupling as boundary condition interface, and the geodesic path as action extremization, a meta-observer, God, as invariant boundary constraint outside space-time, entropy as a subordinate to informational curvature when I've got the latex math. This is not theology, it's geometric speculation within defined formalism. Now the next step is dangerous. We must ask whether resurrection corresponds to persistence of toroidal coherent structure across boundary decoupling due to branch reweighting induced by curvature minimization insertion event. That is Act 3. And it will test the limits of formal coherence. We'll proceed with the next. Okay. The informational curvature of the cross. Act 3, Midnight, the Book, and the Meta-Observer. Now we enter dangerous territory. Because we introduce a meta-observer outside space-time, we are one careless step away from mythology, so we stay formal. No sentiment, no dogma, but structure first. Orthodox Christianity as an energetic ontology. Among historical belief system, Eastern Orthodox theology is structurally interesting for one reason. It distinguishes between essence and energies. An essence is unknowable, and energies is participatory. In formal language, that resembles the transcendent invariant principle outside the manifold and observable interaction fields inside the manifold. Orthodoxy does not claim God as a being inside space-time. It claims God is beyond being, but present through energies. Translate this into Leakean structure. The meta-observer is invariant boundary condition outside. Energies are scalar or operator insertions affecting allowed solution space without violating internal invariance. This is not theological endorsement, it's structural correspondence. Among historical metaphysical systems, orthodox thought is unusually compatible with a non-anthropomorphic invariant meta-principle. That matters, because a framework requires a non-local invariance, a non-space-time constraint, no violation of Lorentz symmetry, and no arbitrary interventions. Orthodox theology, unlike many Western formulations, does not require God to break the physical law. It requires participation in deeper reality. That aligns with boundary selection principles. Now we formalize the next concept, the midnight theorem. When contradiction density within a bounded coherence manifold reaches a maximum such that further internal redistribution is impossible without topological collapse, the system must either undergo a global boundary insertion or transition to a higher order solution manifold. I got that written out in math. Therefore, only non-local boundary constraint can reduce curvature. This is midnight, quote unquote, not a time of day, structural midnight, the moment internal coherence cannot self-stabilize. Now consider humanity collectively. If contradiction density accumulates across the manifold, cultural, moral, existential, at some threshold, only boundary insertion can stabilize global curvature. This is where Orthodox theology interprets incarnation and cross. But we remain formal. We are examining structural compatibility. The soul as a book. Now we return to the toroidal knot. The toroidal soul travels a geodesic in an informational manifold. Each interaction writes a boundary-adjusted perturbation into its state field. Define the world line of the toroidal knot as, I've got latex math written out. Call this math the book, not metaphor, is a full informational trajectory of the toroidal configuration. Biological coupling is a local boundary condition. While coupled, the toroidal knot interacts with biochemical fields, electromagnetic gradients, neural coherence oscillations. The body is a local rendering surface, a projection interface. Now consider the meta-observer, God if you will. Outside space-time, not inside. Invariant under all admissible transformations. It does not intervene, it does not change equations. It defines allowed global solution space. In this sense, the meta-observer, quote-unquote, reads the book not sequentially, because time is internal to they got it written in math. It perceives the entire geodesic at once from outside. In mathematical analogy, the full path integral solution is visible simultaneously. The mind's eye of the meta-observer is the highest fidelity rendering layer. Inside space-time, we perceive partial projections. Outside space-time, the full informational coherence structure exists complete. So where do we most faithfully exist? Not in our biological projection, but in the full informational path, the book. Death as decoupling. When biological boundary fails, metabolic entropy overwhelms coherence coupling. The toroidal knot decouples. This is death. Not annihilation, but a boundary shift. The geodesic continues if the current curvature penalty remains low. If contradiction density destabilizes topology, the knot collapses. If the coherence remains intact, the structure persists as stable solution in informational manifold. Orthodox Christianity speaks of the soul surviving bodily death. Under the Leakean structure, this corresponds to persistence of toroidal informational topology after boundary decoupling. No violation of invariance, no supernatural suspension, just continuation of the solution path under the new boundary conditions. The library. We extend branch weighting. Each toroidal soul path is a weighted trajectory. The meta-observer God's library is not a physical room. It is a total solution space of allowed informational geodesics, where each book is one complete world line, and the many books are the manifold of coherent trajectories. The library exists outside of space-time, because time is an internal coordinate. From outside, all books are complete. The character arc is entire. Not unfolding, but complete. Resurrection revisited. If a global boundary insertion event occurred, Jesus, one that reduced informational curvature across the manifold, it would reweight branches, stabilize coherence, potentially restore toroidal coupling, and a transformed boundary condition. Orthodox Christianity claims resurrection is not a resuscitation but a transformation. This aligns with emergent geometry. I've got it written here. The resurrection would correspond to new effective geometry in which coherent structure is preserved under a new coupling regime. Again, structural compatibility, not proof. Where do we exist most faithfully? Not in flesh, not in neural spikes, not in fleeting subjective perception. We exist most faithfully in the complete informational rendering of our geodesic path, the mind's eye of the meta-observer, which is to say, in the invariant full solution to a toroidal coherent structure. The body is the local page, the world is the chapter, death is a page turn, but the book remains, and the library is a total allowed coherent solution space, outside the space-time manifold. We now stand at the edge. We have integrated orthodox energy ontology, the midnight theorem, toroidal soul topology, biological boundary coupling, the meta-observer as an invariant selection principle, book of the soul, world-line functional, library as a full solution space, and resurrection as a geometry transition. Next comes the final act. We must test falsifiability. If this cannot be distinguished from metaphor, it fails. If it cannot produce cosmological prediction, it fails. If it violates Lorentz invariance, it fails. Act 4 will determine whether this entire synthesis collapses or stands as coherent speculative extension of my Leakean physics. We proceed. We just rendered the entire framework into a single compressed action functional. No poetry, no symbolism, just operators. Now we ask the only question that matters. Does it survive contact with physics? First, does it reduce into GR, general relativity, and QFT, quantum field theory? Yes, when beta goes into 0, beta to O beta into 0 with boundary term vanishes. Second, does it violate Lorentz invariance? No, because all terms are scalar under admissible transformation inside the latex math. Third, does it introduce non-renormalizable divergences? The answer is only if informational curvature coupling runs uncontrollably under RG flow, relative under RG flow. That becomes empirical. Now let's return to the toroidal knot. If the soul is topological coherence class, then its stability depends on, I've got it written out in math. When that condition fails, coherence leaks, identity destabilizes. Under biological coupling, neural coherence oscillations maintain boundary constraint, but when metabolism collapses, the coupling operator CB to 0, mathcal CB to 0, CB to 0, death is decoupling, not annihilation. Whether continuation occurs depends on, like my latex math. If curvature diverges, topology collapses, if finite. Geodesic continues into meta-boundary manifold. Now we approach the deepest claim, the meta-observer. Not necessarily a deity inside space-time, nor not a cosmic engineer, but invariant weighting functional, outside the mathematical text written out of the solution. Selecting allowed global solutions from within space-time. We experience unfolding narrative. From outside, the full geodesic is visible simultaneously. The book is already written, not predetermined by force, but complete as extremized solution. Where do we most faithfully exist? Not in a slice, not in the moment, but in the total path integral, the full geodesic. The meta-observer's mind's eye, quote-unquote, is simply the total solution space rendered without temporal slicing. That is not mysticism. It is perspective shift from embedded coordinate to global functional. Now we return to Orthodox Christianity. Why is it structurally compatible? Because it claims God is outside time. God sustains reality continuously, and God does not violate invariance, but is the source of it. That maps to meta-boundary functional sustaining solution space, not interrupting it, not breaking equations, but defining allowed ones. The cross in this formalism becomes the global boundary insertion event, minimizing informational curvature at civilizational midnight. If the midnight theorem holds, in contradiction density peaked, then only non-local insertion could globally reduce curvature. If such insertion occurred, branch weights rebalance and coherence stabilizes. Possibility of toroidal persistence increases. That is structural interpretation, not dogma. Now the final question, is this testable? 3 avenues. We can 1. Detect deviations in cosmological data from pure GR predictions when informational curvature coupling is non-zero. We can detect biological coherence signatures inconsistent with purely thermodynamic models. Or 3, we can examine whether topological coherence persists briefly after biological decoupling and measurable field signatures. If none appear, the framework fails. If anomalies appear, we investigate. This is not religion replacing physics. It is physics extended to informational geometry. If wrong, it collapses under falsifiability criteria. If right, it reframes consciousness, death, and cosmology inside invariant action principle. We end not with certainty, but with structure. Invariance first. Curvature minimized. Geodesics traced. Books complete in reality, not neutral, but structured by coherence. We now proceed to the final chapter, Act 5, where we confront the implications for free will, determinism, and final unification. Let's continue. The informational curvature of the cross. Act 5, free will, determinism, and the final structure. We now arrive at the edge. If the geodesic is extremized, if the action is minimized, if the book is complete from the perspective of the meta boundary, what then becomes of freedom? Are we merely solutions to equations? Is a toroidal knot just tracing a predetermined path? This is where precision matters, because extremization does not imply coercion, it implies consistency. Let me explain. In classical mechanics, a particle follows a path that extremizes action, but that path depends on boundary conditions. If you change the boundary, the path changes. The action principle does not remove freedom. It constrains allowed trajectories to those internally coherent. Now apply that to the toroidal soul. At each moment of biological coupling, the state field evolves according to this math latex. But within that evolution, contextual variables remain incompletely specified locally. Recall deterministic macro contextuality. Got math latex. From inside space-time, / theta is partially unknown. From the meta boundary, the full configuration is visible. Freedom then is local underdetermination relative to incomplete coordinate slicing, not randomness, not absolute independence from structure, but genuine openness within bounded curvature constraints. You are free within the manifold, but not free from invariance. You cannot violate curvature minimization. You cannot step outside coherence constraints. You can, however, alter the local contradiction density, and that matters. Because contradiction density contributes to, I've got latex math written out, your actions shape curvature, your choices alter coherence flow. The toroidal knot does not passively drift, it actively participates in curvature redistribution. Now consider midnight again. If contradiction accumulates beyond threshold, local minimization fails. Global restructuring becomes necessary. That's true for individuals, it is true for civilizations. It may even be true cosmologically. The cross in our structural interpretation is the archetype of global curvature insertion, but free will operates locally. You choose whether to increase contradiction density or resolve it. You choose whether coherence diverges or stabilizes. That choice alters your geodesic. From inside space-time, you experience unfolding. From outside, the path is complete. These are not contradictory statements. They are coordinate-dependent descriptions. Just as relativity teaches us that simultaneity depends on frame, freedom depends on embedding. Now let's address determinism more sharply. Is a toroidal knot bound to a single world line? Under branch evolution, and I've got latex math, multiple branches exist, each weighted. The meta-observer does not collapse branches arbitrarily. It weighs them according to curvature penalty. Branches with lower informational curvature persist with higher weight. Your actions influence, therefore you influence branch weighting. Freedom is participation in branch reweighting, not freedom from structure, freedom within structure. Now we must face the ultimate question. Is this truly a theory of everything? To qualify, it must unify gravity, quantum mechanics, consciousness, information, boundary conditions, and provide falsifiable consequences. Gravity emerges from variations of R. Quantum mechanics from, I've got it written out here in latex, an operator term. Information from MathCal R, I've got it written in latex. Consciousness modeled as toroidal coherence topology. Meta boundary provides global weighting. It is internally coherent, but coherence is not proof. So what predictions follow? If informational curvature is real, there should exist measurable deviations in extreme coherent systems, possibly biological, from purely thermodynamic expectations. 2. Cosmological anomalies may correlate with large-scale informational coherence transitions. Renormalization flow of coupling may show scale-dependent informational signatures, and neural coherence should display toroidal topology signatures measurable via phase-space reconstruction. If none of these occur, the framework fails. If some occur, it deserves refinement. Now step back. Orthodox Christianity speaks of theosis, participation in divine energies. Under this framework, that corresponds to increasing coherence alignment with invariant preserving transformations, reducing contradiction density, stabilizing toroidal topology. It's not about belief, it's about curvature. Sin in geometric terms is contradiction density increase. Repentance is curvature reduction. Grace structurally is bound to stabilization, not internally generated. But again, these are mappings, not declarations of theological supremacy. Now return to the image of the library. Each life is a complete geodesic. Each geodesic is a book. All books exist simultaneously in meta-boundary space. From within time, we read page by page. From outside, the whole volume stands complete. Where do we exist? It was faithfully rendered, not in fleeting neural activity, not in temporary biochemical coupling, but in full extremized informational trajectory. The mind's eye of the meta-observer is simply the non-sliced representation of the complete action solution. That is the most faithful version of you. Not a shadow, not a ghost, not a completed solution. Now I will end with the final compression. Reality minimizes informational curvature under invariant preserving transformations and meta-boundary weighting. Consciousness is stable toroidal coherence topology. Death is boundary decoupling. Freedom is local participation in curvature shaping. The cross is a candidate global curvature insertion. Jesus in the resurrection and whatnot. Geometry under midnight conditions. The meta-observer is invariant selection principle outside of space-time. If wrong, it will dissolve under the next experience we're going to do. If right, it reframes everything. Not by replacing physics, but by extending it. Invariance first, curvature minimized, geodesics traced, books complete. And that's it for right now. Thanks, man. That's the full lecture I had. That's it. That's the informational curvature of the cross, according to my Leakean physics. And that's clocking in now at about 40 minutes. This has been the culmination of about solid years worth of work and research in physics. Check me out. I'm going to post this recording to YouTube, and it's going to be on my live stream. And also on my StephenLeake.com radio, Stephen Leake Radio. And so thank you for listening. And, reach out to me in my socials. TikTok, it's Stephen Leake 2. On my Facebook, it's Stephen Leake Official. And X, it's Sophia's Daddy 999. And then it's also Stephen Leake Official. Stephen Leake OFF is the handle at Stephen, or is the address at Stephen Leake Official. And then just reach out to me throughout all my socials, and I'm gonna keep doing updates. This is the main chunk of basically Orthodox Christianity being faithfully rendered in physics according to my calculations and stuff. All right, man. Thank you for hanging out, and I'm gonna end it there. I'm just gonna add, thanks for hanging out with me tonight. And come and find me, kid. My mantra is, I'm free, I'm sovereign, truth is my birthright. Keep your signal clean and your soul encrypted. Remember, faith, family, freedom. Now go enjoy your one life and be free, my darlings. I'm Stephen Leake, and we're going to win.